Hello and welcome to our deeper dive for this third week of rerouting. So this past Sunday, I spoke about the fog. While some people have left the church because of mutated understandings of things like what is faith or the church or the mission of the church, while some people have left because of that, left the path, stopped following Christ, we still find ourselves here on the road. Thanks be to God. And yet, we know that this path isn't always sunshine and roses for us. Many of us have gone through some trying times on the road. Many of us are going through those times right now. We can wake up and discover that a fog has settled in around us. And we get disoriented, lost, and drift away from Christ and His church. I told the story of that man from China. A man who was tortured to defend his faith, willing to give up his life in defense of his faith, and yet just a few years after coming to this country, doesn't even go to Mass. The fog drifted into his life, and he lost his way. Like I've said before, our butt may be in the pew, but we are a million miles away. Or maybe just 100 miles or 5 miles. That's what I was trying to help us think about Sunday. What does this fog look like? And so that's why I talked about the two extremes, that the fog exists on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is nihilism. Life has no meaning. There's no purpose to life. Everything's boring and useless and flat. On the extreme end of the spectrum is the rise of the deaths of despair, suicide, alcohol, drugs, or more common for us, numbing out. Binge watching Netflix, the infinite scroll on social media, online shopping, 24/7 cable news, and politics. On the other end of this spectrum is the experience of self-sufficiency. On this end, life is great because I make it great. I go after anything and everything I want. If I feel unfulfilled, it's just because I need to take life by the horns, work harder, do whatever it takes to give myself the life I want. And so while very few of us live at one of these extremes, and some of us do, I know, but typically we can find ourselves moving in one of these two directions. The way out, right, the way out of this fog is the path being proposed to us by rerouting, to follow Christ, to take real, practical, and concrete steps to follow Christ. Not just to do more church things or say more prayers or something. No, our goal is to engage our whole person, the entirety of our humanity, to wholeheartedly follow Christ. In today's deeper dive, I want to help us dig into our humanity just a little bit more. Again, it's very easy to start giving answers to questions that no one is even asking. So we did this. Like me and one of my good friends, he's a priest for the diocese as well. We would often commiserate about teaching kids preparing for confirmation. It was like talking to a brick wall. Like these kids couldn't care less. And why should they? Most of them never attended Mass. Most of them had no experience of living the faith with their families. And yet, we were trying to teach them about Jesus and the Trinity and Christian morality, Scripture. We were giving them answers to questions they were not asking. So me and my friend summed it up this way. Don't tell me about confirmation when I don't even know Jesus. Don't tell me about Jesus when I don't even know why I want Jesus. And don't tell me about why I want Jesus when I don't even know what I want. The issue for them was not that they didn't want to learn about confirmation or Jesus or God. It's that they didn't even know what they really wanted. Their greatest desire was a new iPhone or a watch or shoes or a girlfriend. This is the point. You, the first thing we need to do is begin digging into our own heart to discover who we are, how we work, how our heart operates. We need to learn to listen to our heart. Listen to your heart. To listen for what we truly want, what will truly satisfy. Because typically we aren't clear. We can't clearly tell ourselves what we want. We just start going after things. And just like I was talking about this Sunday, this is how we end up in the fog. We need to reawaken our humanity, the depths of our humanity that cries out from within, and stop just numbing out or stop trying to appease that with an infinite number of partial solutions that don't actually fix anything. So today, we want to dive into the inner workings of our heart. And by heart, I don't mean our feelings. Don't worry, men, I wouldn't do that to you yet. No, what I mean by heart is the core of our being, the center of ourselves, the deepest and truest part of ourselves. All of what makes us us. I found it helpful to break it into 3 principles. So I'll go through the principles and then we'll break each one down. Principle 1 is that our heart is one big need. It is a bottomless desire, a desire for the good. Principle 2 is that we have the ability, the freedom, to set up whatever we want in the place of the good, even if it's not actually the good. And principle number 3 is that we don't get to invent what the good is. It's built into us and into everything around us. So principle 1. This isn't a story about me, but imagine the story of a high school boy. He wasn't a big fan of school or studying, and no matter how much you told this kid how good school is, and even how it's the law that he goes to school, he's not changed. His parents would have to pry him out of bed every morning, yell at him to make sure he took a shower and brushed his teeth and put on deodorant. And he begrudgingly complied, but he was forced to do this, to follow all these oppressive rules and laws that he didn't agree with. Until one day, the cute girl in his class looked at him and smiled at him. And all of a sudden, everything changed. He jumped out of bed every morning to get to school. He showered before school. He loved being at school. Why? Because all of a sudden, his life was dominated not by doing the good. No, daily life, each and every day of his life was dominated by a desire to be with the good. And that's what changed. What drives us, we're driven by a desire for the good, to be with the good, to have the good. That's lesson of the heart number 1. That's principle 1. We have this desire within us for the good. It's built into our hearts, and we pursue it at all costs. And spoiler, this is why the church teaches a morality. It wants to clarify what the good is and what it isn't. And Catholic morality is not just a bunch of do's and don'ts. Catholic morality is a passionate yes to everything our heart truly desires. So that's principle 1. Our heart, your heart, my heart desires the good. Why? Because the good is what will make us happy, what will fulfill us. Okay, cool. But that leads to principle 2. For example, I was hanging out with one of my good friends before Christmas, and I don't mean to expose him like this, but I do. But he was talking about how much he was looking forward to his favorite part of the Christmas season. Hallmark movies. I don't know if you know this, but Hallmark dropped 40, that is 40 new Christmas movies this last year. Since 2009, Hallmark has aired more than 300 different Christmas movies. More than 80 million people will have seen one by the end of this Christmas season. Why? Why are they so popular? And there's a lot of reasons, to be sure, but I would argue at its core, it's because these movies tap into a narrative, a story we are all, at least unconsciously, on board with. And then they wrap it in Christmas traditions and nostalgia that we love, and we can't get enough. Boy and girl falling in love, trying to balance their career with this newfound romance, all while trying to make sure that they get all of their Christmas shopping done. Boy and girl endure a challenge in their relationship, break up, and then achieve their career goals and buy all their presents, but realize that they need this other person to complete it all. And so they make up, get back together, and Christmas is saved. Okay. So what is the narrative? What's the story? Romance, achievement, and gifts, stuff. These are 3 of the most common stories we tell ourselves over and over again. These are the stories we tell ourselves will fulfill us and satisfy us. The story of romance. If I can just find the right person, everything in my life will come together. The story of achievement. If I can just achieve A, B, or C in my career with my kids, I will finally be happy. And the story of consumerism. If I can just acquire A, B, or C, I'll finally be happy. So these movies hijack these narratives, these stories we tell ourselves, and we eat them up. I mean, even for me personally, I had a very specific story, a specific plan for how I thought my life would go and how I wanted my life to go. I've told you I wanted to be a doctor, get married, have a big, beautiful family, lots of kids. That was the plan. But then I discovered that God had another plan for me, a plan that was pretty much not my plan, about the exact opposite, actually. Doctor, wife, kids, how about priest, no wife, no kids? And what did I initially say to that? No. I shut it down. No way, I have a plan. I was pretty resentful toward that call for a long time. What's my point? It's principle 1. Okay, we're driven by desire, a bottomless desire for the good. But principle 2, we have the freedom to set up whatever we want in the place of the good. We can write our own story, forge our own path. And we do this sometimes, oftentimes, without even realizing it. Like, have you ever noticed how some people are really busy? I can't find time to do a lot of things, and yet, almost eerily, every Sunday they have 4 free hours at the exact time that the Chiefs are playing. Like, coincidence? No. Like, that's this principle at work. We pursue whatever we think will make us happy, whatever we think will fulfill us. We can write our own story. And we do this with a lot of things, like food, romance, sports, achievement, keeping up with the Joneses. But then also notice when something gets in the way of that, our stories, breakups, getting fired, God calling you to be a priest, the church saying that what you're pursuing is wrong or a sin, that often leads to a lot of resentment, anger, frustration, hopelessness. I told that story on Sunday of the man that left his wife and young child for another woman. So the church would talk about that as, about abandoning your lawfully wedded wife in order to shack up with another woman as a sin, like it's called adultery. They would talk about it as a sin. And yet, this leads us then to principle 3. We don't get to invent or decide what it is that fulfills us, what the good is. And that's because it is given. It is built into our very nature, into the nature of reality itself. A couple of years ago, I flew to Chicago to visit some of my classmates from seminary. And as I was on the plane, this guy, probably about 35 years old, he sat down next to me and started yucking it up. He was a news broadcaster and he just received a big promotion going to Chicago. After he had shared his news, he asked me, "So, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Catholic priest." And I think Catholic priest was about the last thing he expected me to say. But he kept his cool and asked, "Well, that seems like it'd be tough. Are you happy?" I was like, "Yeah." And a little confused, he said, "Why?" And so I quickly turned the question around on him and I asked, "Well, are you happy?" And he said, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I have it all. Job, girl, house, car, money." And so I asked again, "So you're happy, you're fulfilled?" And then he just got really quiet and tears started to well up in his eyes. And for the next 2 hours, he told me about how miserable he was, how he had everything he wanted and yet still felt empty. And he didn't know why. He'd written his story and yet he was left unfulfilled. This is it. From time immemorial, from Adam and Eve themselves, we, humanity, has fallen for a great lie, a great deception. So the great strategy of the devil isn't to try to possess you like some exorcist movie. His great strategy is to deceive you and to turn you against God. And the lie goes something like this: God is not a father, or at least not a good father. And you can't trust him. And he's holding out on you. And he doesn't really love you. And if you would just be done with him, you could finally find happiness. Just rebel. That's not just what he did with Adam and Eve, but that's what he does with you and me. He casts God in suspicion. And in his place, he tells us, "You do you." Does that sound familiar? Okay, principle 1 is that we're driven by a desire for the good. Principle 2 is that we have the freedom to set up whatever we want in the place of the good. But principle 3, we don't get to decide or invent what the good is because it's built into our very nature. It's given by God. And in fact, it is God and only God that can fulfill us. We've been taught implicitly and explicitly since we were young that fulfillment comes from forging your own path, doing whatever you want. America's built on that. Don't tread on me. And yet, the church's moral teaching are based on our nature, on who and what we are. The dumb example is that your car isn't going to be happy if you fill its gas tank with Kool-Aid. Same with us. God, most especially in Jesus Christ, has revealed our nature to us. And the church has carefully discerned and clarified what that is, clarified what it is that will lead us to true happiness and fulfillment and joy, and what won't. Here's the point, St. John Vianney famously spent hours each day hearing confessions, and once he was asked, "What did you learn from all those hours?" And all he said was, "People are much sadder than they seem." That's all he said. People are much sadder than they seem. Why? Because people are caught in this great deception. That guy on the plane, he fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. The great deception. If you just do whatever you think will make you happy, you'll be happy. I truly think it goes back to the original lie. A lie still perpetuated and advocated for today by even political and cultural means. And it's a lie told to us from the beginning. God is not a father, or at least not a good father. And if you would just be done with him, you could finally find happiness. Just rebel. You do you. And our culture, better than pretty much any culture in history, is able to convince us of this. Remember the story of the Chinese man I told. Going from being willing to die for his faith to not even attending Mass on Easter. What torture and beatings and a cattle prod couldn't do, our culture was able to do, and it didn't even have to try. Our culture throws this lie in our face 101 different ways. Money, relationships, sex, food, work, sports. We go looking for happiness and fulfillment wherever we think we can find it. But as St. Augustine would famously instruct us, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. The path given to us by Christ, the path proposed by his church, isn't some big angry no to all of those things. The church is simply advocating for a yes to Christ, because it is only Christ that fulfills. Not good behavior, the good. Christ fulfills the good itself. The church simply proposes Christ and shows us the path to him. And I think this is summed up well in something the late Pope Benedict XVI said on the day he began his ministry as Pope. And I'll close with this. He said, "If we let Christ into our lives, we lose nothing, absolutely nothing of what makes life free, beautiful, and great. No, only in this friendship are the doors of life opened wide. Only in this friendship is the great potential of human existence truly revealed. Only in this friendship do we experience beauty and liberation. Do not be afraid of Christ. He takes away nothing and gives you everything. When we give ourselves to him, we receive 100-fold in return. Yes, open wide the doors to Christ, and you will find true life. Amen." So here we are, week 3 of Rerouting, and the great invitation for us is to follow Christ, to entrust our lives to him. Not just to say prayers and go to Mass, although praying and going to Mass are important, so important. But to involve our heart, engage our humanity, engage the deepest part of ourselves. When we don't, the fog creeps in and it all falls apart. I think it was easier for that man from China to follow Christ when he was living in such harsh conditions, because it was those conditions that constantly kept him, all of him, involved. It was never just about saying prayers and going to Mass and being nice for him. He knew this was all or nothing. He knew every morning that this was a whole life, a wholehearted commitment. I pray that we will make that same commitment as well. I pray that rerouting will lead us to give our lives to Christ in that sort of a way. Until next time, I'm Father Michael, Pray for me. I'm praying for you. God bless.